Good morning, motivators. A lot of people out there think that I'm anti-carb. Absolutely not. I'm actually fairly pro-carb at the right time from the right sources. Carbs can be a massive performance enhancer, and the right types of carbs can actually help balance out some of the damage that we do to our body with all of the endurance training that we put it through. I want to take just a hot minute here today to talk about some of the best types of carbs that you should be taking on as an endurance athlete to make sure that your weight is managed really well, that your gut health is balanced with all of the endurance training that we put it through, and we might even get metabolic benefits to be able to burn fat a little bit easier, yes, by taking on carbs. And for those people who have blood sugar control, there seems to be some indication that the right types of carbs might actually help with all of that. You'll be leaner, you'll look better, you'll feel better, and your internal health will be better, all by making some really simple swaps with very common foods that you're probably already eating, but just changing the way that they're prepared in order to accomplish all of this. In 2019, when I was training a lot and doing a fairly strict lower carb approach of about 130 grams of carbs per day, which is very, very far from keto, but it is also fair bit lower than the typical Western diet, I ended up gaining about 15 pounds, and gradually my digestive health got fairly bad and I wasn't really able to keep up to the training. Yeah, the carb restriction ended up improving my race performance, but it did have a fairly detrimental effect to my overall health, which is why I want to talk about this, and I don't use the lower carb approach anymore. I don't even talk about what I do in terms of lower carbs. I talk about nutrient timing and things being much more balanced. As I started focusing on gut health, my symptoms ended up getting better. My weight ended up stabilizing, and my gut health, with what happens on the throne, ended up actually being a fair bit better. And it's no wonder that this happened, because as I started researching gut health with what is going on with exercise, there's a lot of damage that we do, and there's a lot that we don't do to actually offset that damage. This study here asked straight up, is there an exercise intensity threshold capable of avoiding leaky gut? Leaky gut is a situation where the lining of your stomach ends up degrading and food particles end up actually leaching into your body. This isn't what we want. This creates a ton of inflammation and food sensitivities and problems with gut health. It's a really bad thing when you start getting a leaky gut. Just go down and boom, it hits right on the nose where it says, it is recently shown that 60 minutes of vigorous endurance training at 70% of the maximum work capacity, 70% of VO2 max. This is basically right around the top end of zone 2. So anything past that for 60 minutes led to the characteristic responses of leaky gut. So all of us out there doing sweet spot training, lots of long intervals in preparation for a race, this is fairly hard on the gut. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, because challenging ourselves with endurance sports, super fun, super cool, super rewarding. It gives us the structure and the motivation to maintain our health. But how do we offset that to make sure that we don't create a long-term detriment to our overall health? How do we then fix this? Well, again, research is starting to find it out for us. A study called a randomized trial to determine the impact of a digestion-resistant starch composition on the gut microbiome in older and middle-aged adults found that, spoiler alert, we'll go down here. This isn't sponsored at all, but they used a resistant starch product, and I'll explain what resistant starch really is, to see what actually happened in the gut when people took a resistant starch. And what they found very clearly was that there was an increase in bifidobacterium in both elderly patients and middle-aged patients compared to a placebo. It's a well-designed study that showed that you could actually get those good bacteria boosted up, not by taking a probiotic, but by taking a prebiotic, a resistant starch. The outcome of what this results in is super interesting for endurance athletes who are very conscious of managing our weight. This study here, called Resistant Starch and Energy Balance, Impact on Weight Loss and Maintenance. The study says there is strong evidence demonstrating that resistant starch lowers whole body and visceral adiposity, body fat. The magnitude of these changes in adiposity are very large and sufficient to independently improve insulin sensitivity and reduce the risk of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and certain cancers. If you end up diving into this study, you might notice a couple of things, that a lot of this research is done on rodents. That's totally fine, because the lifespan of a rodent, being very, very short, can then extrapolate really well and apply to the lifespan of a human, where doing a long-term, multi-decade study is almost impossible, but the effects on rodents is fairly similar to the effects on humans. In addition to that, you might just say, well, Taryn, these are just one study here or there. If you start looking at study after study after study about this, they all kind of say the same thing. One thing that's also really interesting to us is that ingestion of resistant starch is really good for actually fat burning, keeping that blood sugar nice and low with resistant starch. It ends up promoting the ability to burn fat as fuel, something that we as endurance athletes really want to do. So, where do you get resistant starch? There's 5 really common foods that we end up using very, very regularly in our cooking and changing the way we prepare it to increase the amount of resistant starch. The first one are unripe green bananas. The unripe green bananas, they have a high amount of resistant starch. Overnight cooked and cooled oats. Common overnight oats, but make sure that you cook them beforehand. And the cooling process of anywhere from 12 to 24 hours really increases the amount of resistant starch in those oats. Same thing with rice, cooked and cooled rice. So we will often pre-cook our rice and put it into a Tupperware container in the fridge. And we'll often do the same with potatoes, because potatoes have the same thing. And potato starch actually is also really good resistant starch. And then finally, beans. The more you can cook with beans, the better, because beans have a really high amount of resistant starch. Tip, we make a healthy version of Franks and beans with homemade sauce, homemade beans, and then like a really nice sausage. I recommend that you try making some small changes with the types of carbs that you have. If you have rice, just cook and cool it. If you have oats, cook and cool it. If you have potatoes, cook and cool it. If you have bananas, eat them when they're green. You're probably not going to notice instant health improvements, but over a long period of time, the same way that bad habits like smoking might not show themselves to be detrimental to your health for decades, these good habits will end up showing themselves to be positive to your health over the course of decades. One of the really awesome things about resistant starch is that it keeps your blood sugar nice and low so that you can still access fat as fuel and be metabolically healthy. Segue into today's sponsor, UCAN. They are my exclusive nutrition provider and have been for the last year, because they're a type of carb that burns so slow that your blood sugar stays really stable and you get a lot of energy over a long period of time instead of a big spike and a crash. Now you can go to ucan.co/Taryn and read a blog post on how to use the timed carb approach. And if you buy anything after going to that link, you'll get a discount at checkout. No affiliate links there, just a little bit of a how-to and a discount that you'll get at checkout for that. And if you want guidance on what to take when during your training, go to app.mymotive.com, where all of the workouts in our training app have recommended nutrition to help create that metabolic flexibility to help you with all of your training. With that said, later, motivators.